So as I mentioned in my last video, I just finished up at the Sundance Film Festival, which is something that I have experienced and attended in person in both 2019 and 2020, just before the world went to hell. This year, it was all digital, meaning that I could fill every waking moment with a movie living like this taxidermied fox on way too much caffeine. And for those of you who don't know, Sundance Film Festival is one of the biggest film festivals in the world that is primarily used for independent films to kind of find wider distribution. But they also do have some major premieres that feature here as well. This year, the really big one would have been Judas and the Black Messiah. And a bunch of my favorite movies have premiered at Sundance over the years. We have Whiplash, Kajillionaire, The Farewell, Searching, Little Miss Sunshine, Hereditary, Get Out, Reservoir Dogs, 500 Days of Summer, 9 Days, Minari, Memento. All sorts of amazing movies have their start at Sundance, stuff that you might love, stuff that you might hate, but there's usually always something really interesting there. And even though it was half the usual length as it normally is, again, because you could fill every waking moment with a movie, I actually saw like the same amount or a little bit more than I usually do across the full festival. By the end, I caught 55 of the 72 premieres. Most of what I'm missing was documentaries, but I caught a bunch of those too. If you're interested in hearing a little bit about everything we saw or about every single movie, over at the Intercut podcast that I do frequently with my friend Zach and Art, who runs the Let Me Explain channel with Alina, we combined saw every single feature that was at the fest and we talked about every single one of them. So those videos are going to be releasing by category on the Intercut channel, which I'll have linked down below. We have a few individual reviews there for some of the movies we liked as well. But I thought I'd go ahead and give my thoughts on some of the standouts, the stuff that I liked the most, the stuff that I didn't like so much, and the stuff that just really made you think and were memorable for one reason or the other. So to start off with the best of the best, let's talk about Judas and the Black Messiah. Not only does this have a badass name, and if you know what it's about or if you've seen it, you know why it's such a badass name, but this was just an incredibly well-made film. This movie was already being distributed by Warner Brothers, so it didn't need the distribution power of Sundance, it just chose to premiere there, but it's also the movie that I wish I could have seen at Sundance, probably more than just about anything. Some movies you just want to catch on the big screen and be part of the moment, and this was one of them. Like, this movie hit so hard. I was supposed to watch a movie after it, but I just felt the need to sit with the story, look into the real life people and the events. I ordered a book. But Judas and the Black Messiah is based on the real story of Fred Hampton, the deputy chairman of the Black Panther Party who was assassinated in 1969 on orders from the FBI, and all the things and people who were involved in how and why it happened. And just about everything in this movie was just impeccably executed. All the performances in this movie were fantastic. Lakeith Stanfield and Daniel Kaluuya literally delivered career best performances, which is super impressive considering how great their careers already are. But it's not just them. Jesse Plemons delivered one of his best performances as an FBI agent. And a real highlight was Dominique Fishback as Deborah Johnson. She's really the glue that holds so much of this together. The multiple sides of this issue and what's worth living and dying for come together through her. It also shows multiple groups of people coming together under a common goal and why that terrified the powers that be. My money's on Kaluuya for the Oscar, but everybody showed up for this movie. And what Shaka King accomplished as a director is incredible. This is a story that would have been so easy to feel unfocused, overcomplicated, or just generic with the wrong direction. Everything about this movie is captivating from beginning to end. Nothing feels unnecessary, nothing felt cheap, it's focused with emotional intensity. And it never lets you forget that this is based on real events. It pulls it all back to these real life interviews that's gonna hit you like a gut punch. If you're a fan of historical dramas, thrillers, or just damn fine filmmaking, this is a must watch. I hope I don't oversell it, but everybody in my friend group was overwhelmingly positive about this. I haven't seen a single review that dipped under a 4 out of 5 star rating.
Anywhere there's people, there's power.
So that was my number one coming out of Sundance, but let's get into the stuff that would actually be considered like a Sundance movie. Something that was there to try and get some bigger distribution and some more attention. And my favorite of this category was On the Count of Three. Starring Gerard Carmichael and Christopher Abbott and directed by Gerard Carmichael, On the Count of Three tells the story of lifelong best friends who decide to end their lives. But before they do, they decide to take that last day to take care of some unfinished business and just rid themselves of some things that burden their lives. And that might all sound depressing as hell, right? It is, but it was also hilarious. It was the most quotable of all the movies I saw and probably the funniest as well. Nihilistic humor, for example, is just really popular right now and it has been for a few years. People joke about wanting to die all the time and you kind of have to engage with whether or not they're being serious or if it's just a coping mechanism to deal with some kind of mental anguish or just negative mental states in general. And in this, it's a bit of both. A lot of the one-liners actually become heightened because of the subject matter. Carmichael in particular had some great lines. One was about how people always try to judge you for quitting, but quitting is amazing because it just means you don't have to do something you hate anymore. And at the moment it was about a job and it felt really relatable, but it's that other level of what's going on in the story that makes it a lot darker. And it just results in something that feels really honest because people find humor in pain and then can actually find some peace from that pain. And I'm already a huge fan of Christopher Abbott, who's kind of like the king of Sundance right now. He was in 2 movies last year, he was in 2 movies this year, but I feel like this was a really standout performance for him. And what he brought to this role was really special. Gerard has great progression through the film, but Abbott is just in this state in life where wanting to die is just something he's known for so long that he's not really going to feel like how other characters in movies experiencing these same emotions come across. He's very light for someone who's planning to die. And through all of this, it still ends up being a give a shit movie in the most extreme way because it shows people at their worst and the things that can contribute to that and why there are reasons to live, but it's also very honest about the reality that some people will struggle their whole lives. This was my most anticipated movie of the fest and it did not disappoint. It had a very daring ending, and though I didn't quite know how to feel about it when it originally happened, it is something that's just stuck with me since I saw it. If this gets a Blu-ray release, I'll be buying the Blu-ray, and it feels like it would fit in well over at A24. Pleasure was a movie that I mentioned really quickly in my worst movies of 2020 video, but not negatively, just as a reason why it was something that felt less pornographic than 365 when it was literally about the porn industry. Or should I say about the harsh realities of that industry. And for that subject matter alone, some people should definitely skip this. If you have issues with sexual violence, this is not the movie for you. But this does serve as a really brutal look at the realities of this industry. Jessica, under the name Bella Cherry, moves to Los Angeles from Sweden to make it as the next big thing in the industry. However, as she's making friendships and learning her way through the industry, she quickly realizes she'll have to continue pushing herself past her limits to stand out and make a spot for herself. And what we get is a horrifically tense movie that just scratches the surface of what really happens. We're shown the difference between larger budget sets and smaller ones, shoots that are completely run by women and how those differ from the ones where it's just like one guy and a camera, how the former can lull you into a false sense of security so that when you end up in the situations where it's just the one guy and a camera, things can get really bad really fast. How she'll be told she doesn't have to do anything she doesn't want to, but that's literally just to get her to do what they want her to do. And while there are moments of levity in this film, it mostly just shows why people are attracted to this kind of work in the first place, how much of yourself you have to give to make it, and how much it is very much willing to take from you. Sophia Capel was fantastic in this role, especially when you consider it was her first full feature-length film. I could not imagine doing a movie like this, let alone as my first on-screen debut like that. Or I guess on laptop because it was digital, but still, it's graphic, brutal, and heartbreaking. And even though it was the only movie not in the midnight category to premiere in the midnight time slot, it's definitely the most horrific movie I watched at the festival. CODA is the big movie out of this year's Sundance, and for good reason. Last year, Palm Springs beat the distribution record after it was purchased by Hulu for $17.5 million and 69 cents, and CODA blew that out of the water when Apple TV bought it for $25 million. And I'm guessing it got that high because multiple studios and streaming services probably bid it up there. Because this was a movie that just completely warmed my heart. This is gonna be the one that's easiest to walk away recommending to family members and other people that aren't into art house flicks. And it was the first official movie that I saw at Sundance that wasn't a screener link, and it tells the story of Ruby, a teenager who is a CODA, or a child of deaf adults. Her mom, dad, and brother are all deaf, and she's essentially become this link to the outside world for them, essentially having to interpret for them through all aspects of life, from their work to doctor's appointments. Every morning she has to wake up at 3 a.m. to help the dad and the brother on the family fishing boat. all while managing senior year. And I know a lot of people who are the children of immigrants or people whose parents didn't speak English as a first language could really relate to this movie because of the fact that they spent so much of their childhood translating for their family. But this in particular is a coming of age story that is going to hit so many of the familiar beats from these types of stories. But it's that unique aspect of the family dynamic that really escalates it and both shows a very real aspect of society that often isn't shown in media. And for all the tropes and cliches and things that should probably feel a little bit sickeningly sweet, this has so much genuine heart that it trumps all of that. I think I cried 3 times in this, and it was all in the best way. You get the classic pull of what she feels her responsibility to her family is versus her own dreams that she actually has a chance to pursue. The dynamic with the family is just amazing, and the cast was all great. Amelia Jones in particular learned American Sign Language and how to sing for this movie, and you can tell that a lot of care went into it. This is an easy crowd pleaser and the one that I'll probably watch again someday with my parents. Let's hope that 25 million pays off. And the last for my top 5, but certainly not the least, goes to One for the Road. I watched this right after CODA, which means I got like a back-to-back super emotional journey, and I loved it. So One for the Road starts with Boss, a bartender living in New York who gets a call from his estranged friend back in Thailand who's dying of cancer, looking for someone to help him finish up a few things before he passes. But it quickly becomes obvious that there's a lot more going on here than what initially touches the surface. What starts as a journey through Aoud's past life and the things he wishes were different, the things he imagines could be, eventually shifts to a story about Boss's own life path and what might have set it off. What we get is an intimate look at friendship, reflection, regret, loss, and redemption. Every time a cocktail or needle drop happens to signify some really important moment in their life, the more I just feel like I've been punched in the gut in the best way. Though at one point it does start feeling like a completely different movie, and that's not necessarily a bad thing because when it comes together at the end, it just works so incredibly well, but there is probably the chance that you could tidy this up somewhere in the middle. It'll probably still feel like it has these 2 distinct threads in the story, but it totally makes up for it because this is such a satisfying journey with an amazing ending. I watched this movie 2 weeks ago and it's still stuck with me, and I'm very excited to revisit it. So those were my top 5, but some runner-ups would be Mass, which is a story that could have gone a lot of ways in how it was handled, but thankfully it was done respectfully and incredibly well. The opening of the movie seems to be trying to conceal what it's about, but the sentence description completely gives it away, and the movie title leaves little for the imagination here. So years after a tragic shooting, the parents of both the victim and the perpetrator have a conversation in an attempt to find some peace. So you can understand why this was some very heavy subject matter, but it was written and directed by Fran Kranz, who you may recognize from Cabin in the Woods, and I can assure you he handled it with respect. I don't know how people close to this kind of subject matter will take it, but it's really obvious that they did their research from a lot of different angles. There are some areas where it feels a little bit too social media with the discourse, but it still feels real. But the real standout performances here come from the moms, played by Martha Plimpton, and specifically Ann Dowd. This pretty much all takes place in one room of a church, so it is completely performance driven. It's why it kind of feels like it was adapted from a stage play to some people, but it wasn't. But the grief so accurately depicted on screen makes way to an incredible amount of empathy that you can just feel while you're watching. This is obviously a super heavy movie, and right when you think you're in the clear, it's gonna come back to deliver one last gut punch. Marvelous in the Black Hole was a really solid coming of age that I think will do super well on Netflix if Netflix picks it up, and is definitely friendly for middle school audiences. And this is just another one that's gonna make you feel good as this young girl tries to process a lot of really heavy emotions while finding a way to express it after making friends with a magician. 8 for Silver ended up being a really unpopular movie with some people, but I thought it had such a unique take on both the werewolf story and the werewolf transformation that alone makes it worth the watch. And when you can come up with something unique in that area, it's so impressive because of how long this has been in our mythos library. It does get a bit weaker the more you actually see things on screen, and it's probably a little bit too slow burn for the jump scare fans, but then also a little bit too jump scary for the slow burn fans. But this is something that I would have greatly enjoyed watching in a theater, so worth the watch if you can catch it somewheres. World to Come, where once again I am asking Vanessa Kirby to speak to me specifically in her American accent. While Indian takes a look at generational trauma and actions and the shockwaves those actions can send through life. This kind of ended right when I felt it was really starting, and I gladly would have taken an extra 30 minutes on this, but still worth the watch. Passing was another movie that immediately made me want to read the novella that it's based on. It tells the story of two mixed-race women from the 1920s who have the ability to pass as white, one of who has literally created an entire identity around that ability. It obviously ends up being a really heavy look at race, classism, sexuality, jealousy, and resentment, told through beautiful cinematography that's being used specifically to heighten these themes. But by the end, I felt like there was so much going on that the movie didn't really take time to really invest itself in any one of these issues individually. Amazing performances, and shows that Alexander Skarsgård is 100% willing to be that guy. So before we get into some of the more different ones, I do have a full list of everything I watched on Letterboxd, and a lot of them have, quick little reviews tagged onto them. So feel free to check that out if you kind of want a general idea of where I ranked what I watched. But now on to these ones. And first up are #J, a modern retelling of Romeo and Juliet through cell phones and Instagram. Yeah. And I thought I was going to be spared the iambic pentameter when I saw the very modernized text messages they were sending back and forth, but nope. 1 second it's completely casual teen talk, and the next second they're on FaceTime delivering Shakespeare. And this would have been infinitely better if they had modernized the dialogue in the same way they did the delivery. The only character that sounded natural delivering these lines was the guy who played Mercutio. And that was a combination between the type of character he is and the actor was just better. And the people that struggle the most are Romeo and Juliet, so that's obviously a problem. Though it does mean we got to see Angel Batista say, "You're a saucy boy," so it's not all bad. Did you ever have an English class where the teacher let you get really creative with how you did either book reports or just interpretations of plays and books, just to show that you really understood what was going on and to get you excited? That's what this felt like. Except it's an actual movie. However, Juliet is into Junji Ito though, so that's cool. And what had to be the most disturbing, unsettling, and disgusting movie I saw at this festival, and potentially one of the ones I've seen in my life, Mother Schmuckers. This is something so disturbing that's trying to be funny that it feels weird. Usually when something's this gross and disturbing, it's trying to be completely that in a horrific sense. This is providing all of that to you with comedic delivery. I caught this one early, if you remember me posting on Instagram about a movie that I wasn't allowed to talk about because I was embargoed, but I felt really sick after watching it. That was this. And funnily enough, this was also the movie that got me my first official pull quote. I'm 10 minutes in and want to puke. Send prayers. Only thing is, that particular quote was about pleasure. I just mentioned Mother Schmuckers on the same thread, and based on what the movie is, they were like, yeah, must be about this. But considering all of Mother Schmuckers made me feel sick, I'm not gonna bother correcting them, and I'm just gonna enjoy my accomplishment. This is a movie that immediately makes me question how it was even made. It's like they sat down and thought, how do we have two of the most supremely stupid people in the world come across all the most illegal fetish content that exists and try to keep it comedic? It's like Jackass went off the rails in a narrative feature in a direction that Jackass would never legally be allowed to go. He uses all sorts of camera tricks and close-ups to make you feel sick. It's absolutely attempting to make you feel unwell, and if you're lucky, you'll have some laughs along the way. But warning, it absolutely deserves a content warning. Some people will be very disturbed by the things that are in this movie. Some people do not find the stuff that happens in this movie to be remotely funny. A lot of the stuff that happens in this movie that's being delivered as comedy is not funny, but it literally starts with them cooking and eating feces. And if the baseline for your movie is eating shit and it only gets significantly worse than there, that should kind of give you an idea of what to expect. But again, no, it really doesn't. Probably gonna be great for a YouTube video though, so there's that. And then a documentary that actually released the Friday following the festival that's gotten a lot of mixed reactions and reviews. And that goes to Glitch in the Matrix, which is like if a subreddit of really shitty conspiracy theory people got together to try to make a philosophically significant documentary, and it went about as well as you can imagine based on that description. I don't know if the documentary was really trying to say anything on the topic or just examining the type of people that believe this is all a simulation, but while highly entertaining at times, I can't exactly call it good. I'm super into examining the idea that this is all a simulation or that we're in some kind of multiverse. But having the guy who killed his family because he got obsessed with the Matrix as a key contributor for this documentary might not have been the best plan. There's clearly something going on where he was unwell, but again, mental illness is not an excuse for the kind of actions that you commit in these situations, and we probably shouldn't give them a platform to talk to people about how this is all a simulation. I think on one end it was trying to say, look, this is how far I went down this rabbit hole, and it's not like that, but still, there's literally an entire segment about some guy who got so obsessed with the idea that Minecraft is just the perfect example and examination of what us in the AI simulation would actually be like. Minecraft. This whole documentary was like, hey, let's make some people feel important, right down to them believing that people that don't want to interact with them are NPCs. To be fair, some of them also thought that they could be NPCs at some points too, but still. The Philip K. Dick stuff was kind of interesting, and I will be looking more into that because I'm a fan of his work, so that was interesting, but some of this stuff was like, come on. For a significantly better documentary that takes a look at perception, virtual technology, AI, check out All Light Everywhere. But yeah, my friend Zach's review of Glitch in the Matrix was, this movie likes all of Elon Musk's tweets. This movie's fridge is full of Mountain Dew. This movie wants to know which character I play in Smash Bros. This movie hasn't changed its clothes in 3 days. This movie wants to know if you can bring weed because he's all out. This movie has a sticky basement. This movie just premiered, but I swear I overheard my college roommate watching it while I studied for an exam. So again, not necessarily not worth the watch. I just don't necessarily know what it was going for, but it's really funny at times. But then again, you get interviews with someone who literally murdered his parents, which just kind of sucks that hilarity right out of it, and it gets really serious while it's not necessarily being presented that way. I don't know. But yeah, that was this year's Sundance. There was a lot of other interesting movies that I saw, a lot of really good documentaries, just too much to talk about in one single video. So again, if you're interested in knowing more, if there's a movie that I didn't touch on here that you were excited to know some thoughts on, keep an eye on that Intercut channel. We are going to be breaking it down by category, so there'll be a movie for the midnight section, a movie for the next category, which is usually my favorite, but was pretty disappointing to me this year. All that kind of stuff will be broken down over on the Intercut channel. But thank you all so much for watching. Thanks as always to my Patreon supporters. Subscribe to the channel if you're new. Leave a like on the video if you're into that kind of thing. I hope you're all having a fantastic day. I'm mostly okay, and we'll catch you all later.